So I really like Joe Castiglione. He's the Oklahoma athletic director. I dealt with him a lot when I worked in Oklahoma. I think he's a very savvy athletic director, runs a good athletic department, and he's just a really good guy. But he botched the NCAA tournament selection committee, and he was either poorly prepared or just didn't handle himself yesterday in some of the questions about what they did. And here's my big beef. I laid some of it out, and I'll get to Monmouth in a second. But we've gotten to the point now where the cushiest job in college athletics for athletic directors and conference administrators is to be on the men's tournament selection committee, because you fly around the country, you go to games all year round. It's a very visible position to be in. You get the high-profile weekend that is the selection show and all the media that comes with it, and then you are front row, whether your team, whether your school's in it or not, at all these events, all these weekends, all these regional sites and sub-regional sites, and then the Final Four for the next month. It is a big honor for these guys to be a part of. It is high profile. It is a game changer for your career in some cases. But are they the best people to be deciding our bracket? Joe Castiglione is the full-time athletic director at the University of Oklahoma. He's got a team that could do some serious damage this month. He had a football team in the college football playoff. He is dealing with Bob Stoops and Lon Kruger and Sherry Cole on the women's side, and a good softball team and a good baseball team and all those sort of things all the time. That is his job. He's got to talk to boosters. He's got to build facilities. He's got to do all that stuff. And you're asking him to watch 500 games or something like that throughout the course of the season from not just the Big 12, which he's focused on with Oklahoma, but you're asking him to watch the ACC and the SEC, and not just the big conferences, but the Big West and the Mountain West and the MAC and the MAC. I mean, that's what you're asking him to do on top of his job. And then he's got to be the mouthpiece for this organization when they go out and put out selections like they did yesterday. And I just think we've reached a point now where this sport is so beloved and there are so many people who are into it, and that is what they do, that we could do better on that selection committee. I mean, think about it. The College Football Playoff Committee was pre-selected. They aren't. There was a couple athletic directors. Jeff Long was there this year. But there's a lot of former coaches in that room. There are other people that are greatly invested in the sport of football that are in that room. I think that's important. I mean, maybe you have some athletic directors on there, some administrators on the selection committee in basketball, but would anybody have a problem if we had Jay Billis or Doug Gottlieb in the room, or find a former coach that you really like, maybe an Eddie Sutton, or I'm trying to think of some other former coach that would be really good that's around and kind of high profile. But would anybody have a problem with those guys in the room helping to make those selections? I certainly wouldn't. And I don't think many people would. Those are guys who have devoted their life to the sport of college basketball. That is what they watch. It is what they do. It is what they eat, breathe, and sleep. I want them making up my field. I want them making these decisions. Should Tulsa be in? Should Monmouth be in? I want those guys making those calls, and they're not right now. And so when you get a bracket like yesterday, when everybody who does this, who pays attention and knows these teams and knows the numbers inside and out, when they're all getting teams wrong and several teams wrong, and it seems like only the selection committee comes up with the 68 teams that they came up with, why is that? How does that happen? I want better. I think the sport deserves better. And I think we deserve better answers when we get selections like we did yesterday. Phone lines are open. 737-7767 is the number. Let's go to David. David, good evening. What's happening?
Hey, Steve, you're absolutely right on this, because even with the coaches, that could be on the board, I wish they had Coach K. I wish they had Coach Newton. And you're right. I thought when Vandy's season was over, I thought the best they would do is get an NIT bid. I'm tickled that they got an NCAA bid, but if they play like they did the other day, it ain't going to last long. And you have a great night, Steve.
Thanks, we appreciate it. And no question about it, I think a lot of people thought Vanderbilt was done when they laid that egg in the first half against Tennessee and couldn't come back and finish off the comeback in the second half when Wade Baldwin's shot was waved off after replay at the buzzer. And then you've got the bubble shrinking around that. It looked like it wasn't going to be good for Vanderbilt. And again, I said that as I looked at it, I didn't think they're a glaringly bad case of a team to include. But to me, if they got in the field, they're the last team in or the second to last team in. And if they're out, they're one of the first couple teams that's out. That's where they are. They're in that window, and resumes are generally pretty close together, so it's hard to see how they're that far out of that to be the fourth team into the field. It's even harder to see how Tulsa, who a lot of people had like 10 teams out, is in the field. And that's the question. And I want to go to Monmouth here because I think Monmouth is a good example to explain some of this stuff. The committee wants teams, whatever conference you're in, to go out and do a couple things. Schedule tough in your non-conference. Play away from home. Don't just rely on your home court and playing there. And they want to see who you've beaten. Those are kind of three very generic but very important metrics that the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee goes by. If you're a power conference team, if you're Vanderbilt, if you're Michigan, whatever, your strength of schedule is going to end up being pretty good just by the simple fact that you're going to play 18 games plus at least one tournament game against your league. So you're going to have 19 games or more against Power 5 schools in your league, and chances are a few more in your non-conference. That's going to give you a pretty decent strength of schedule just by default. Those teams don't have to worry as much about leaving home because of that. It's not as important to their resume. So anytime they do leave home, it's going to be carefully constructed and all of that. And who do you beat? Well, if you're any good at all, Vanderbilt, again, a pretty good example here. You're on the bubble. You're clearly a pretty decent team. You're in consideration for this. You got to be okay. You got to be able to beat somebody. Well, Vanderbilt has those 19 games against SEC schools, plus they had 3 exempt games in Maui where they got Kansas and, was it St. John's, and I forget the other one over there, Wake Forest maybe. But you get those games against Power 5 teams. They played at Baylor. They played at Purdue. Vanderbilt went out and scheduled. They had a pretty good non-conference schedule. And they deserve credit for that. So they played away from home in some cases. They had a tough non-conference schedule. But when you look at that sheer volume of games, if you're any good at all, you're going to win some of them. And you're going to get a top 25 win or a top 50 win or a top 75 win. Michigan, for instance, had 16 games against the top 100. 16 games. They're in the discussion. So chances are they won a few games, and they did. But you know how many of them were against the top 100 in the country? 4. Tulsa, kind of a similar thing. They ended up with, I think, 9 wins against the top 100, but a big chunk of those were 75 to 100, which aren't tournament teams. When you look at their top 25, 50 wins, it's 2 and 3. So let's look at Monmouth. Monmouth finishes the year with 27 wins. That's the most of any team excluded from the tournament, along with St. Mary's. They play in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. Not a Power 5 league by any means. So what do? They listen to the committee and they go out and schedule tough. They start the season off at UCLA and they win. Then they play at USC, a tournament team, a couple days later, and they don't win. But then they get USC again in a rematch on a neutral floor in an exempt tournament 2 weeks later, and they beat them by 10. In that same tournament, they also beat Notre Dame and took Dayton down to the absolute wire. After the tournament's over, they win at Georgetown And they go to Rutgers. I know Rutgers isn't very good. But still, Power 5 team, Big Ten school, on the road, and they win. They won 5 games against Power 5 teams in a 13-game non-conference schedule. All 5 games were away from home. They played 1 game in their non-conference that was at home. 1. They played 1 game before January 4th in their home gym. Think of any other team in the mix here that's going through something like that. They went out of their way to play away from home, to schedule as tough as they possibly could. And then they go into their conference, which they can't control. So all the controllables, they went out and they did it. They scheduled tough, they played away from home, and they won important games. Then they get into their league, a 20-game schedule in the MAC. Monmouth goes through the league at 17-3. 17-3. That is a decisive conference schedule win to win the championship. Their 3 losses are to Iona, who's a team who's in the top 75 of the RPI, a very good team, and ultimately the team that then beat Monmouth in the conference championship game to get the automatic bid to get into the NCAA tournament. So Iona's a tournament team that handed them 2 losses, one in the regular season and then a very, very, very tight game in the conference tournament championship. The other 2 losses that Monmouth had during the conference season, at Canisius and at Manhattan, they are getting crushed, and the committee used this as justification for why they shouldn't be in the tournament, because those teams are sub-200 RPI teams. Throw in a loss at Army, who's also in that category, and it was 3 bad losses, they all said. 3 terrible losses that you can't get in the tournament with because that wasn't consistent enough. Well, that is a failure if you're looking at the RPI to understand exactly what that means and what a road win truly entails. The probability to win the game at Army for Monmouth was 58%. Just better than half the time would they be expected to win that game by analytics and KenPom, which is the best college basketball site out there. What's worse is the game at Canisius that they lost, they were actually an underdog in that game. So they are considered a terrible loss in a game that they were actually expected to lose. And if you want to say, well, these big boys, if you put Michigan up there, you put Vanderbilt up there, they would just stroll through that league. Would they? If you had to play 10 games on the road at Canisius, at Manhattan, at Monmouth, at Iona, you had to play all of those games on the road in these cracker box gyms, hostile environments on the road. Would you win all 10? Because even 90 percentile games that you're supposed to win, which that's what they'd be for maybe a Vanderbilt or a Michigan in some cases, although I don't know if Canisius or Iona would by any means. You don't win every 90% game that's out there. KenPom did a thing that he explained the differences in road wins and home wins and some of that, and just how poorly the RPI demonstrates what a good win truly is and what a really good win truly is. The exercise that he did and the analytics that he did said beating the 90th ranked team in the RPI on the road is about as tough or about as valuable as beating the 50th ranked team in the RPI in a neutral site game, which is about as tough and about as valuable as beating the 20th ranked team in the RPI in your home gym. Think about that for a second. A win over the 90th team. So a team that's not in the NCAA tournament, may not even be in the NIT. A win over that team on the road is just as tough as beating Maryland at home. That's what the numbers tell you. But that's not how the selection committee of the RPI works. You beat Maryland in your gym, it's a top 25 win. Top 25 win, that's it. It's just a great win. Doesn't matter the fact that it's in your home gym. You lose to a team that's 150 in the RPI on their court. That's as good as beating a bubble team at home. But you lose to them on the road, and that's a crusher? That's what teams like Monmouth have to deal with. And so I'm frustrated for Monmouth because I think they should have been in, but I think even more so, basketball fans should be frustrated about the precedent that kind of set, because they've been telling mid-majors all along that this is what you got to do. You got to schedule tough. You got to play road games. You got to win those games. You got to give us a resume that's clean. Well, that's what Monmouth did. Monmouth scheduled tough, really tough. They went on the road to play almost all of these games. They won a bunch of them. They won 5 games in the non-conference on the road against Power 5 teams. And then they went and they dominated their league. And the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference isn't the worst league out there. I mean, it's 18th or 19th. So a very middle of the pack league, obviously, but it's not 30th. Dominated the league. And they don't get in because of 3 bad losses in their conference. Bad losses in their conference. To me, that's saying, hey, all you mid-majors, we don't care. We don't care. We don't care what you've done, because you absolutely have to be perfect to have a shot at this. So that's my beef with the selection committee. We can take more of your phone calls, 737-7767. If you want to get in on the program tonight, we'll also hear from those coaches coming up. Time for a break. Back with Kevin Stallings after this.